אנחנו נתחיל בעברית, ומשם נמשיך להצגת המוצר באנגלית. אז שלום לכולם, כיף שבאתם, כיף לראות פה חברים, לקוחות ואנשים כל כך יקרים. אני מודה לכם שבאתם. מי שלא מכיר, קוראים לי אייל ואני הבעלים של ZDS. ב-ZDS אנחנו מאמינים שעל מנת להעצים את הלקוחות שלנו, אנחנו צריכים לייצר להם ערך שהוא הרבה יותר מעבר לשירותי סייבר ואינטגרציה, ולכן אחת לכמה זמן אנחנו עורכים כנסים כמו זה, ובהם אנחנו מביאים אנשי מקצוע מהמעלה הראשונה, ובמקרה הזה מערכת מהמעלה הראשונה, בכדי להעשיר אתכם, הלקוחות האהובים שלנו. רגע לפני שאציג לכם את דיוויד ואריק, הדוברים שלנו להיום, אני רוצה לספר לכם על השינויים האחרונים שביצענו. בעולמות ה-IT, השירות שלנו תמיד מוטה אבטחת מידע, ולכן עברנו בסוף 2023 למערכת ניהול מרכזית שמאפשרת להעניק לכם שירות טוב יותר, ניהול מדיניות עדכונים, התקנת תוכנות צד שלישי ושליטה מאובטחת מרחוק, הם רק חלק קטן ומינורי ממה שהמערכת הזו מסוגלת לעשות. באמצעותה הלכה למעשה אנחנו מצליחים לחסוך 2 משרות של אנשי IT, והעובד הממוצע נתקל פחות בתקלות. בשירותי אבטחת מידע וסיסו אנחנו במגמת צמיחה מטורפת, ומעניקים ללקוחות שלנו מטריה עצומה של פתרונות, מרמת ה-EDR ועד שירותי סוק ומבדקים, סקרים וחקירות, וכמובן מערכת FortifyData. ב-2024 עוד ועוד ארגונים ממשיכים לבחור בנו בתור ממונים על אבטחת המידע של הארגון. הלקוחות מביעים אמון ומצטרפים אלינו לקבלת שקט נפשי בעולמות הסייבר וה-IT. אני מאוד הייתי רוצה לספר לכם עוד על השירותים החדשים שלנו שאנחנו מתכננים להשיק, אבל אני צריך לשמור את זה לפעם אחרת. ולענייננו, היום דיוויד ואריק הולכים לחשוף בפנינו את הפלטפורמה של FortifyData. המערכת בודקת את הנכסים הדיגיטליים שלכם ומציגה המלצות לתיקון כדי לחזק את סביבות המחשוב שלכם החשופות לאינטרנט. בנוסף, המערכת היא כמו לר שוויצרי, ויש חלקים נוספים הקשורים למשל לשרשרת אספקה, TPRM, בדיקת תשתיות ענן כמו אז'ור, אמזון וגוגל קלאוד כמובן, ניקוד בהתאם לסיכוני הסייבר ועוד. דיוויד הוא מנהל המחירות האזורי שלנו באימיה, ובנוסף לאחר מכן אריק שהוא ה-VP of Technical Service ידבר ויציג את המוצר מבחינה טכנולוגית, הוא מכיר את המוצר על בוריו. בסיום הוובינר אתם תקבלו סקר שישלח אליכם, ומאוד נשמח שתקדישו 2 דקות למלא אותו. So, דיוויד, בום דיה ותודה. תודה לכולם שהצטרפתם. The stage is yours, David.
Thank you very much, and bom dia and good afternoon for all of you. I'm speaking from Portugal, here from in this case from the Algarve. I'm in the Algarve today. So thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank you, Ayal, Zenkel, and ZDS for this opportunity and for inviting us to this webinar. Me and my fellow companion of these wacky roads, which is the management of cyber risk, Mr. Eric Smith, the VP of Technical Services. We've been joining this road for a couple of years together, so we're glad to have this opportunity to talk about this and the problems that we are solving. Please bear in mind this. I'm not going to be very extensive on the deck that I am presenting. That deck can be shared to you all afterwards. You can ask IL to share with you guys the deck. The floor star of the moment is going to be how we're going to solve the problem that I'm going to initiate, which is basically the problem that led towards our beginning of our platform being available in the market. I'm going to share the deck with you guys, but I will promise you, here we are. I think, okay, I think it is visible, the deck already, so I'm going, okay, so okay, here we are. So very quickly, so we are a automated cyber risk management platform. We comprise the entire monitorization of your attack surface, and this, as AL, from what I was able to understand, mentioned from the external visible assets that you have exposed to the internet, to your own internal data, cloud instances, and also your critical vendors. The way that we do this, and then this is completely unique, is to basically answer a big problem that currently, and this is not a problem that it's only seen in Israel. We have done these webinars everywhere. So from Brazil to the US, from to Singapore, Germany, all sorts of different places, and they all have one thing in common, and that thing is we are completely understaffed. So the cyber guys, the good cyber guys, the guys out there are trying to protect the data, we are quite understaffed. So this is one of the big problems. So what we had so far, and or up until now, to help us mitigate the problems was not being will not suffice, didn't suffice to solve the problem. So here's the big thing. So first and utmost, we need to be very upfront with the problem. So the first rule of engagement in a crisis situation, like General Sun Tzu said, is to know your enemy. And your enemy currently is not only trying to grab a hold of your data for economical purposes, is also a geopolitical background into it. And this is why we have been adding a lot of threat intelligence information into our platform. And in your case, it is quite clear and quite consensual that Iran is a big threat, and they are trying to grab a hold of the data that it's stored in your companies, and they will not tell you about it. They will keep quiet. They want to steal the technology. But one of the things that we had so far is that I would say the first generation tools, you had all of the detection being sorted out, the results by the CVSS score. But the thing is, and this is interesting, and this is, I share here the link for the study, is that looking or trying to prioritize your mitigation needs, looking exclusively to the CVSS score, although it's always a good idea, but it will not suffice. It will not suffice because we are lacking of people to sort all the problems. So we need to prioritize. And how do we need to prioritize this? We need to be aware that currently the problem here is the following. If you're not being hacked already, you will soon enough. Sooner or later, you will. So we need to think about, in the case that happening, okay, what portions of data must I protect first, and how can I make that a prioritization over the results of all the tools that I have in place for me to take a look at the problems I have. So most of the CVEs and most of those CVSS scores, lack of contextualization, all of this means very quickly. Although a CVE on a specific asset is important, each one of the assets has its own criticality according to your business impact. So should they be breached somehow, what's the business impact? Do they have compensating controls? So these are the two factors that need to be added into the equation so that you can prioritize correctly, okay? The common, as I mentioned, it's outdated, and it's going to bring you results, too extensive results, a lot of noise, and no contextualization according to the business impact of that potential problem being exploited. That's the biggest thing. And this is what we are going to solve, and we're going to show you how we can do it. Now, we need to understand, okay, that on the other side, the bad guys themselves are going to take the opportunity to exploit. But do they know where lies the most important and vital information? They do not. So that's the knowledge that you have and that you need to keep. So most of the times and most of the cases, they know. that the most critical events are going to be tried to be sorted out by the internal teams and the moderates and lows later on. But here's the thing, you need to think like the enemy thinks. They know if they see a critical event, right? They know that highly likely it's going to be addressed soon enough. But the moderates, the likelihood of being standing there for weeks and weeks and weeks, it's more likely. So they are going to try to exploit that, those moderate to low vulnerabilities, instead of the criticals at the first hand, because time is of essence and they don't have time and they don't like wasting time. So this is another equation to the problem that we need to face. So you might be wondering, okay, so what can I do? Should I address the moderate and lows first and the critical ones later on? No, sir. You need to address those that have no compensating controls and pose the biggest business impact to your infrastructure, regardless of being moderate, low, or critical. Those are the ones, all the assets are important, but there are some that are more important than others. You need to address them first. You know that you can't reach out to all of them, so you need to highly prioritize. And there is a way, and we're going to show you how, to basically do that in an automated fashion, because we need to bring optimization into these processes. And this is what FortifyData does. FortifyData will, and Eric will show you and explain you how technically it is done. But in terms of rationale, the platform, what it does is it will scan all of the attack surface, but it will drill down a prioritization list daily, because this is continuous monetization, according not only to the old equation for risk, but adding the existence of compensating controls and also the potential business impact on each one of the assets, so that you know what you need to address first and then what you need to address later on. So for that, this is the equation when we need to include the potential business impact. And this is what FortifyData does in terms of automation and makes your job easier. It makes you allocate your resources directly to where it's needed without going chasing around like headless chickens around all sorts of different types of problems that most of them aren't even true or relevant, or as relevant as they should. Okay, so we need to dam our risks. We need to let go some of the risks underneath so that the dam itself will not collapse, but hold what it is most precious at all times. This is the analogy, and this is what FortifyData will do, is you can grant that all your precious data is stacked in the dam, okay, and taken care of, okay? For that, you need to have, well, shall we say, the first elemental strategy. You need to know where they are located, what compensating controls have been set up for each one of them, what's the business impact analysis. So if this specific asset is breached, what could happen, right? And what types of data, not only on a security perspective, but also on a compliance perspective. If should you, for example, try to maintain frameworks such as ISO 27701 or NIST 2.0, for example, with all of these frameworks are available in our platform. By the way, we have two main pillars, security and also compliance. Compliance should be a topic for an upcoming webinar, but we will focus on this one on the security portion of things, okay? Now, after this being said, and all these recommendations, before you hit the panic button, because, oh, you might be thinking, oh, I don't have enough people to do that. It's a big mess. It's too much. It's overwhelming. Well, this is why, and the reason why we are helping our existing customers. I think there's a couple of customers here. I don't know if no, not yet. So if there are any customers, they can, reach out to us and they can share their thoughts and their opinions about the platforms. It's quite visible. We have Hayel himself using the platform to manage some of his customers, so he can share his experience. But here's the thing: the rationale of this platform, it will help you to achieve this goal, okay, and to generate efficiencies in your day-to-day jobs. Okay, so the solution basically, it's this platform. I'm not going to go through all of these. I would love to have Mr. Eric Smith and IL as well together, looking into the platform and showing it. But before this, so let me just give you one quick reminder about FortifyData. It's a SaaS-based platform. It is comprised with different modules, so you don't have to cover all of them at once. You can choose which one you need at first as a use case, okay? But as you are going to be able to see, okay, you can prioritize your needs, you can have tasks being issued, and most importantly, monitor your critical vendors. Let me just share with you, and I will share as well in this chat later on, the most recent studies about the impact of third-party risk in your risk itself are astonishing in terms of the dimension. I can tell you, last year, Gartner reached 62% of the data breaches were caused somewhere in your supply chain. It's more than half, and it's growing. So it's a deep concern that we need to address, if not being addressed already, but we have here the tools to address it and to scale that program. So I'm going to give the floor to IL and to Eric Smith to show the platform itself and show how we can do this on a regular basis. Okay, Eric's.
All right.
Sorry.
You have to stop sharing before I.
Wait. Okay, here we are.
All right, so let me go ahead and share my browser. And I presume everyone can see my screen now. All right, so I'll just kind of go along with what David has already outlined. FortifyData is a automated cybersecurity risk management platform, and it was designed to address a problem that is common to all of us. And the problem is threat actors are constantly probing all of your exposure, trying to find out what vulnerabilities you have, trying to formulate a plan on how they can use those vulnerabilities to accomplish, well, what the bad guys love to do: steal your data, encrypt your data, interrupt your operations, etc. They're very good at it. They have a lot of resources. Many of these, as David pointed out, are backed by state entities. So what do you want to do about this? How can you do something about this? And the three problems that our platform has been designed to address are awareness, analysis, and prioritization. And I'll hit each one of those in turn as I go through the platform. But the awareness is the first step. If you're not aware of what your actual exposure is, then you can't take any of the further steps. You have to know what a threat actor can find out about you. To that end, the platform has been designed using the same tools and techniques that a threat actor would use in order to figure out, well, what is your attack surface and what vulnerabilities are present on it. So for example, using a single data point, mainly your root domain, that's it, the root domain of the company. And that's usually what the threat actors start with themselves. We automatically footprint you. We figure out what your external attack surface looks like to begin with. We automatically harvest your assets using a combination of OSINT technologies, which lets us find some of your assets. But then we leverage your very own assets to help us find other assets. For example, if you have a website and it links to other pages that are with other URLs, we follow those to see where they go. And from that, we can build a complete map of everything that you have. Even beyond that, we will leverage your very own DNS servers, which can be very helpful in this. And again, this is how threat actors behave, to further that and verify that those assets are alive and that they belong to you. So by using all these techniques, not only do we do a very thorough job of finding all of your assets, but we essentially eliminate the possibility of detecting assets that don't belong to you, which is a common problem of making sure that, well, I may have an IP that I used to use, but now that IP belongs to some other company and I don't want it included in my attack surface analysis. We eliminate that process by how we do asset detection. Then there's the next piece of the awareness, and that is, well, now that I know what all of your assets are, what do I have to work with? Again, thinking like a threat actor. So the next step is we assess all of these assets. We scan them. And we are not looking at a small subset of ports and services like there are other solutions out there that do, that may look at a couple of hundred or maybe a couple thousand ports that could be out there. No, we're sweeping the entire attack surface, getting everything that's relevant for you. And then we're not stopping there. When we find an open port, and let's assume we find TCP 443 open.
Apologies, Eric.
Yes.
Apologies, Eric. Perhaps we need to briefly explain the difference between the passive collection versus our scanning, please,
yes.
For sake of not being misled towards thinking that we are, the old generation of security rating stuff that it's out there.
Absolutely, sorry. Absolutely good point. And the point that I was just making about the concept of how we're doing our scanning, that is something that does separate us from many of the other solutions that are out there, the first generation solutions. I was at a conference not long ago where I was showing the product to someone who was unfamiliar with us, and he was comparing us with one of our competitors. And he said, "Oh, so what you're doing is how is that different than just, say, harvesting passive data from Shodan and repackaging it and selling it to me?" I said, "Well, you're quite right. That's what a lot of people do, and that is passive data collection. It's any data that can be obtained on you without actually touching any of your assets, without actually probing them. And there's a lot of data out there that's like that. And the data is not useless, but it has two major flaws. One, and probably the biggest one, is that it's not comprehensive. There are a lot of vulnerabilities that cannot be surfaced via passive data analysis. A very big one that recently hit, for example, well, I say recently, not all that recently, but Log4j. You can't reliably detect Log4j with a passive analysis. Same thing goes for Spring4Shell. The MoveIt vulnerability was not something that could be identified via a passive analysis. So a lot of the bigger things that have impacted the cybersecurity world in the last 12 to 24 months have been things that just you would have never found with the passive analysis. And that's why we do the active assessments that we do. The other downfall of a passive analysis is the data that you do get tends to be historical in nature, or what I like to call laggy. You will find data in there that while it may be accurate, it's 30, 60, 90 days old. We are talking about cybersecurity here. In the cybersecurity world, 90 days is also known as an eternity. All right. You cannot operate effectively if the data that you're looking at is dated. And while there are other platforms out there that will say they are doing, for example, daily updates on your data, what is not obvious is that, yes, you may be getting daily updates, but it's operating on 90-day-old data. So it's very similar to trying to do day trading in stocks, but the stock price and information you're working on is 90 days out of date. You're not going to be a very effective stock trader if that's how you operate. So we looked at this and said, this is not a good way to run things. And that's why we do the active analysis. So by scanning your ports, identifying the services, and then we go deeper into that and say, if we find a port open, we're not just going to assume, let's say if it's running on TCP 443, we're not going to assume it's a web server. It probably is, but we're going to probe that service to see how it responds. What kind of data will it give up about itself? How will it identify itself? From there, we can engage additional tests. Let's assume it is a web server. Well, we'll query it, and from fingerprinting, we'll determine what kind of web server is it. Is it IIS? Is it Apache? Is it Nginx? What is it? And then from there, we can engage even more specific tests. If it's IIS, what version of IIS? Well, let's say it's IIS 7.5. Well, now I immediately know you're running a Windows box, and I know what version of Windows you're running, which means I can engage additional tests from there that can narrow things down even further. Can I get minor patch revision numbers on your IIS service? If it's configured improperly, it will give me that information, which both tells me that it's misconfigured, and now I know what patch levels you're running. So that's just an example of the type of analysis we do on a single port on a single service, but we're doing that across all of the ports and all of the services. Now, that in and of itself may not sound like anything magical, and it's not. But the magical part is this is being done continuously, which is something that you just simply do not have the manpower to do. And even if you did, the amount of data it would produce is too much to keep up with. So that leads into the next part of what we have built into the platform, and that is the analysis engine. So let's assume here that you have this asset that we've scanned. It's got 16 issues on it. You want to dig into those details. Well, now you can see the vulnerabilities that are present on the asset, and you can drill into these vulnerabilities for more detail. For example, let's look at this PHP vulnerability, where you can see here's the FQDN, there's the IP, here's the finding. This is the threat that the finding makes you vulnerable to. Here's the overall risk level. David shared a beautiful slide that explains how the risk is calculated. I'll get into that in more detail in a moment. We show the issue in plain language, the proposed solution in plain language, because we're attempting to give you everything you need in order to do a remediation. And also, if you want more details, you can see we go all the way down to the port, the protocol, and the asset that's involved on every finding. We will also always present you with our evidence field or fields, because remember, we are not using a single tool to obtain this data. We're using a multitude of tools. Some of these are commercial off-the-shelf tools. For example, we leverage Nessus technology in order to do some vulnerability detection. But that's not where we stop. We also leverage various open source tools. We have things, for example, we're using a version of Nmap for port mapping. And why not? Nmap is a great tool. And then we also have custom tools that we've written ourselves that address specific scenarios. But the important takeaway is that there are two important takeaways to this. Number one, you get the benefit of having all these tools without having to have all these tools. You don't have to buy them. You don't have to maintain them. You don't have to train on them. And you don't have to gather up all the data from them. We do that for you, and we do it continuously. And the other benefit of having many different tools involved is that some tools are better at some things and not so good at other things. By leveraging the strengths of every tool, we can increase the number of things we can find, and the tools cross-check one another. So if tool A gets a finding and tool B can also verify that finding, then tool B is automatically invoked and they compare their results, and tool C and tool D on down the line. So this gives us the advantage of being able to cover more of the vulnerability space and at the same time drastically reduce to the point of practically eliminating the concept of false positives, which is very important because you do not need noise in your data. You need to know that what you're looking at is both comprehensive and accurate. So we're also going to highlight, are there any CVEs present? If so, we give you links to them. And then again, to assist with remediation, we're going to find off-platform reference documentation about the specific finding so that you can go and do further investigations. And 9 times out of 10, this documentation is going to tell you exactly what you need to do in order to remediate the problem. So again, that's the first bit on the awareness phase. Now let's talk about the analysis phase. And for that, again, I will remind you of the wonderful slide that David showed of how we calculate risk. Now, we did not make this up. This comes straight out of the NIST handbook about how risk is calculated. Risk is the intersection of impact and likelihood, all right? So in this case, our impact relies on two variables. The first variable is the CVSS score. Now, nearly everyone is familiar with this, and this is traditionally how people prioritize things, but it's lacking a lot of context. And it can lead you to remediating things that are really not as severe as the CVSS score might otherwise indicate. And the chief among them is, well, the vulnerability may be severe, but what if it's on an asset that is not critical to your operations? What if you have a 9.8, like in this case, severity vulnerability, but it's on an asset that you don't care about? It doesn't have anything, no important data on it. It's not linked to anything important. If it was compromised, it would be annoying, but it is not disastrous. But let's also say that you have a CVSS 6 vulnerability, but it's on the most important asset that you have. It has the most sensitive data or the most critical operations for your organization. Well, which one should you fix first? If you go with the CVSS method, well, you would go after the 9.8 first and neglect the CVSS 6, perhaps for quite some time, because it's a 6. But in reality, if you were analyzing this properly, you would know that, no, I actually need to work on the 6 first because it's on a more critical asset. That is factored into our equation here in asset classification. You can classify your assets according to criticality, and that helps drive the scoring model, and it helps drive the prioritization module, okay? But that's not all that goes into it. This is just the impact. There's also likelihood. Now, likelihood is a very complex subject, and it depends on a lot of different data points. We gather those data points. So, for example, if you're going to assess the likelihood of something being compromised, one useful thing to know would be, well, are there any exploits available for it? And if there are, that means this is easier to exploit, which means the likelihood goes up. So we're searching to see, are there any rootkits and CVEs available for every single finding? If they are, we show which one it is, or however many. In some cases, there can be a lot. And that feeds into the likelihood model and would make the likelihood go up. We're also checking the CISA KEV list, the known exploited vulnerabilities list. Is this under active exploitation? If it is, well, that means active campaigns are going on against this. For example, when MoveIt hit, that was a major vulnerability that everyone was suddenly trying to exploit. People with MoveIt would have seen that this is an under KEV list. You would see that's the case, and that would increase the likelihood. There are other things we're checking as well, though. We're checking all of the open threat exchanges to see if this FQDN or if this IP address is known to be doing something it shouldn't be doing. Let's say, is it scanning someone else? Is it generating spam? Is it participating in a botnet? Things of that nature, which we call IOCs, or indicators of compromise. That would be a telltale indicator that this asset may already be compromised because it is misbehaving. That would increase the likelihood. And then let's not forget the threat actors. What are they up to? We are tracking what they are doing. Are they targeting specific industries? Are they targeting specific vulnerabilities? Or in your case, are they targeting specific regions? Right? So all that information feeds in here as well. And if they are targeting you, your vulnerabilities, or your region, all that is noted, and that feeds into the threat model. And then we're checking to see if there are other ports and services and vulnerabilities that exist on this asset that may be contributory. Say, for example, if you have a vulnerability in place, and let's say it's relatively moderate vulnerability, but if there is a certain kind of misconfiguration, or if I have access to another type of data, say, for example, I have credentials with a password on dark web, and that, if that's present, it makes this vulnerability much more dangerous or much more likely to be exploited. That is accounted for as well. And again, feeds into the likelihood model, which then is calculated with impact, which then feeds into the risk level, and that drives the entire platform. The way you see this,
Eric,
Go ahead.
Sorry. I think it would be interesting if Mr. Ayal could share his experience, because Mr. Ayal is currently managing a company which is our customer in Israel. We're not going to disclose the name for sake of compliance issues, but Mr. Ayal can share his experience because prior from having our tool, they had a security ratings tool in the past, and Mr. Ayal managed both at the time there was the security rating tool, and he's managing it now. Perhaps you could shine on your experience of how easy it is, or how hard it depends on your opinion. You're free to have your opinion, using this methodology on a daily basis. Sorry, I think it'd be, you can speak in Hebrew if it is easier. Mr. Ayal?
I don't mind speaking in Hebrew, but there are some people who hear from abroad, so I'll stay in English, and if someone needs a translation afterwards, I'm here. So first of all, I'll start. Actually, we used a different tool in the company that David mentioned. The tool was very cumbersome. It was not simple. I mean, also, I'm not saying FortifyData is simple, but it is simple to understand and to comprehend. And in the back, it's very complex. But for the administrator, for the user, it's very understandable. So that's one thing. But the thing that mostly disturbed us was that we had a very low score to begin with, and every time we tried to fix something, I mean, so it's I'll just tell about the company. It's a global organization. It's about 12,000 employees, and I mean, every time we needed something to be fixed, it's like a whole process of ITIL just to do some change management and maybe contact, or probably contact, external vendors. And until this change was implemented, it could take 2 weeks, it could take a month. And after that, so sometimes we got, okay, it's fixed. And then we had to wait about 6 months for the tool to give us feedback whether it was fixed or not. So once we got feedback, if it was a good feedback, that's great. But if sometimes, or even most of the times, it wasn't a good feedback, and we also got a worse feedback. I mean, we got so you didn't fix it, and now it means your patching cadence is bad, so we're lowering the score even more. Yeah, this is what Eric is now showing about patching cadence. So, I mean, this was terrible. And in FortifyData, we have not only that it does that every week, it does a reassessment of the environment, and not 6 months. It also now has a new feature that Eric just introduced to us, I think 2 weeks ago, that the rescan. Yes, that's what Eric's showing on the screen. So whenever you change something on your asset, you can just go ahead and rescan it. And it's not immediate, but it takes a few hours depending on the asset. And then you just get the evidence or score or update that you wanted. And this is a huge leap than what we used to have there. Again, 6 months and several
Sorry,
hours.
Ayal, I can share you. This is now being used by the SOC teams. So they get the prioritization according to the business impact. They see the tasks are being sent to them. They do what they need to do. They validate by rescanning it. It's done. Let's move towards the next one, and so forth. That's how it's being used.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, that's
Sorry.
fine. So another point, important point is that all the assets that we had in the previous system, whatever asset we had, like a marketing website, it was considered as critical. And if it's a critical asset I mean, in the system, and you have a medium score or a low score, it would take the entire organization score down. And in FortifyData, we can classify the assets. So we can say, I think you can see on the screen, so you can see critical, moderate, and low. And so you can have like 9 issues in a low classification asset. So it will impact your score, but it will not take the entire score down. So this is something we can also use to show management. So I mean, we couldn't depend on the other tool to show the management all the reports about our external assets because, first of all, it was too low, and it seemed like we were just chasing our tails. We couldn't do we couldn't do proper work with it. I'm not mentioning the tool name on purpose because I don't want to go into it, but I think a lot of organizations in Israel know the tool. And so this is another point. Okay, so of course, if you have a critical asset, you want to be notified, you want to see the score going down. I mean, you don't really want it, but you need to have an insight about it. And in general, this tool, FortifyData, it helped us along the road to discover several things like that we didn't know about, and because that's a global organization, then we couldn't have known about it without this tool, because they're scanning all the organizations' IP addresses and domains, and I don't even know the entire mechanism behind it. I guess it's some intellectual property of FortifyData, but they managed to discover assets that we didn't know about before, and they do belong to us because it's a huge organization that purchased along the road, along the years, purchased other companies and organizations and implemented them inside it. So all sorts of ITs that configured all sorts of stuff. So for one instance, of course, you know, Fortinet, which had on occasions they have flaws, security flaws, and CVEs. So we discovered several Fortinet devices open to the world, and not in the VPN, but in the admin console. So even though they had like an OTP or whatever, but if there's a CVE that can bypass the login, then we want to know about it. And we discovered that using FortifyData. We also discovered like a remote access to an environment which was secured and was not supposed to have remote access using that tool. So
Eyal, can I ask you a question though?
Sure, go ahead.
If it is possible to give me like a simple answer to this, can you quantify roughly or give me an idea on how this tool, FortifyData, enabled you to respond quicker to the needs in terms of cybersecurity?
Oh, much
How
quicker.
quick, how effective on a day-to-day basis? How can you quantify or explain how quick and how efficient it became?
Well, first of all, it's much more, I don't know if the word is convenient is right, because I mean, it is convenient to work with the tool, but when you get, maybe you'll have the word, when you get an immediate response, almost immediate response from a tool after you do some work to enhance your security, and then you want to rescan, it's like you know, apples and oranges, you know, to compare between apples and oranges. I mean, it's a whole different world to work
The
with
phrase you're
data.
looking for is game changer.
Okay.
Game changer.
And I'm sorry if I'm now if I sound like a salesperson, but I didn't mean to do that, because it really helped. It helped us to work properly in this organization. Okay, it's okay. It was a game changer. I agree. So it's just easy to go inside and check what's your status. And when the CISO wants a report, then you can send the report. I believe, Eric, you will also probably show the report feature. And I mean, you have a detailed report, you have, of course, a summary report for management. You can do a lot of things with this tool, and in this organization, we're very, very pleased.
One thing that Eyal mentioned that I do want to point out here is he talked about the rescan and the rapid remediation, but I want to point out there's the confirmation part of that as well. A very common workflow is you find a vulnerability, you issue a ticket for the vulnerability to be remediated. Because most of the time, your staff, you're going to end up delegating this, sometimes even to an outside third party that needs to perform some action to remediate. Let's say you're hosting this with a third party and they manage the platform for you. You would need to tell them, hey, I need you to upgrade the PHP on this. There's a vulnerability. Well, let's say you issue that ticket and they say, okay, it's been done. Well, how do you know it's been done and done correctly? What you would traditionally do, if you want to be thorough, is that you would go and do your own analysis. You go do your own scan or check or whatever. But again, who has time to do that, especially at scale? So it ends up not getting done. Or maybe you don't even have the tools to do it. Well, what happens here with us is we find these vulnerabilities, and when they're remediated, you do not need to take any action in order for us to account for the remediation. In fact, there's not even a mechanism to do so, because we would not trust a human to tell us that it has been remediated. We check. So what happens is on every time we touch an asset, we're not just looking to see if there are any new vulnerabilities, but we're checking to see if any of the old ones have been fixed. And if they have been fixed, you'll see they move from the risks and vulnerabilities list to vulnerabilities addressed. And if it shows up on this list, and by the way, this is the only way it can move, it means that it has been fixed completely and correctly. We also note when it was fixed, because if you'll note on this original screen, you'll see the finding date. This is when we first discovered the vulnerability. And then on the vulnerability addressed, when it's fixed, we note the date we discovered it was fixed. And then we do a little bit of simple math, and we can tell you right here how long it took to be fixed. This is incredibly valuable if you have internal SLAs that you need to meet, or if you have SLAs with your third-party support vendors, to know that they're actually adhering to those terms. Now, I've also mentioned the idea about tasks, assigning tickets. We have an internal ticketing system you can use if you want. You'll see right here, there's this thing called create tasks. And it's very, very simple. You find a vulnerability here, for example, and you want to assign it to someone. You could say, you know, fix this ASAP. You assign a priority. You assign a due date. I need this done by the end of the week. And then you would assign it to a person that needs to prosecute it. They'll get an email notification that you've assigned them a task. They'll also get an in-platform notification, so they really can't avoid knowing they've been tasked with something. And then you can track that task's progression right here and see all the tasks that have been assigned, whether they're not started, whether they're in progress, whether they've been completed. You can drill into the task status. You can even have entire messaging conversations within the platform about the task. Let's say you assign the task to someone and they go to do it, but they say, oh, wait a minute, I don't have root privileges on this asset. I need to be granted that. They could put that message here. You'll be notified that they're waiting on you for something. And then you can say, oh, I'll take care of that. Okay, now you have root, try it now. They can say, great, I can get in. Okay, now it's fixed. Again, and the entire process is kept in one platform. There's no other chain of emails or other things that need to go back and forth. So if you need to keep track of this from an auditing standpoint, you always know what's going on because this stays in the platform forever. An auditor can come in here at any time, 5 years from now, and say, who addressed this TLS vulnerability, or sorry, the Suite 32 vulnerability on this asset? Oh, well, Eyal did. Eyal assigned a task to David Oliveira, and it was taken. And David said 2 or 3 things back and forth, and then it was fixed, and it was fixed on XYZ date. You have all that data forever. Okay, so everything.
I think I'm in trouble with audit now. You've put me in trouble. They're going to take a look at this.
So the cool part about it is that we're automatically accounting for remediation, so you don't have to. This is your confirmation that it was fixed and fixed correctly, and that the task management and auditing capabilities are there so that you always know what happened, who did it, when, why, how, etc. And not only you can do that, but any independent auditor can come in and see the same information if you ask them to. All right. So again, we're trying to help you solve all of the common problems that you run into, not just awareness. What is my attack surface? What are my vulnerabilities? But analysis. And that is, well, which one of these are more important than others? Because I don't have infinite staff. I don't have infinite budget. I have to prioritize and make sure I'm working on things that will yield the best improvements of cybersecurity for my organization. Then the last bit is the prioritization of going through and doing all that and making sure that what has been addressed was actually addressed correctly, tracking it and making sure there's an audit trail. Any questions on any of that? I know we've covered a lot of ground here already. Or David, is there anything specific else that you'd like me to hit before I move on?
Well, not really, but just to say that this is important for security purposes, but also, and this is something that we need to put in the horizon, this is also a compliance platform. So should you or do you need to send this to external auditing or internal auditing for compliance purposes? All of these interactions, issuing the task, making proof that it has been fixed, and all the interactions will be kept in the platform, and you can share this in a report to either external audit or internal audit for compliance purposes. Although we are not going to dive too much into the compliance portion of things in this session for sake of time, I think it is going to be the topic of the next webinar that we will present later on, but you can just browse very quickly how we can do it.
Absolutely. Of course, I was going through the list of compliance frameworks that are built into the platform. We have pretty much every major compliance framework known to man in the platform. This has been built based on customer requests over many years, so it's very comprehensive. However, if you have a specific compliance framework that you need and it's not in this list, all you need to do is request it. We put it into the platform for you verbatim, just like everything else. This is not adapted. This is the actual PCI 3.2.1 questionnaire. You can see the questions are context sensitive. You can upload evidence files and put in notes. But the other bit we're doing is we're actually checking. This is our big party trick, and I won't get into too big details about it because, as David indicated, it's a complex subject. But what we're actually doing is we're checking the answers that the person, you or a vendor, because again, this applies to vendors, what answers are given against the assessment data. So if you've got a question that's asking something about what kind of controls do you have in place, and if we find a data point that looks to be at odds with the answer, in this case, they want to know do you have controls that would restrict connections between untrusted networks, aka threat actors, and sensitive data environments. Well, of course, this person has answered yes. our validation assistant is going to go through the assessment details, and it's identified, well, wait a minute, you have open database ports. You're exposing Postgres and MySQL right here on this asset. And if you're dealing with a vendor, this is super important, because now you know the vendor may be answering this question either incorrectly or dishonestly. And now you could ask them questions or require them to upload evidence files to give you some sort of confirmation, good feeling that you can say, you've explained it. I understand why this is here, and I'm okay with it. I will accept it as is. But again, we keep all of that in the platform, and it's auditable. So if during a questionnaire process, if you find something on a vendor that looks suspicious, you query the vendor about it, and they say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. That's a test environment. It doesn't have anything sensitive in it, and it's not linked to anything critical. And here's some documentation to that effect. And let's say you accept that risk, but then 6 months later, they get breached. And when you look into the breach, you find out, well, they breached this thing, and it caused a problem, which means either they lied or gave you incorrect information. You have all this as an audit trail. So you can go back and say, well, yes, I did accept that risk, but it was because they gave me all of this. We identified it. They claimed it was not a problem, but it actually was. You're covered. All right. You did your due diligence. That's incredibly important, especially with dealing with vendors. Okay. The other thing is we're not limited to the standardized frameworks. You can create your own questionnaires, and you can use these internally, or you can use them on third parties. Okay. So just covering that little bit from the questionnaire perspective. I did want to touch briefly, because it was a bullet point here on the meeting invite, accurate reporting and managing your cybersecurity budget correctly. Of course, we have all of these reports that are built in the platform. You can get reports on yourself. You can get reports on your third parties. You can get reports on your subsidiaries. Okay. And as y'all mentioned, you've got everything from the very high level reports like the executive summary reports. And then we've got the far, far more detailed reports like the detailed vulnerability reports, which is, I'm going to call it the kitchen sink report, because it has absolutely everything about everything. And we've got other reports in between, and specific reports like, well, show me everything has been remediated within a given time period. The default is the last 30 days, but you can pick anything you want. It'll show you everything has been fixed, which is great for end of month reporting to your board and letting them know this is what we've been busy doing. Email security, annualized loss expectancy reports, compliance level reports. We have a cloud security posture module as well. So all these reports are available to you, but if the reports are not sufficient, if you need them presented in a different way, or if you've got some very specific way you want to do reporting, understand that all of the data in the platform is accessible via API. So you can pull this data out, put it into Power BI or Tableau or whatever you want, and do whatever you want with that data. We have, just to give you a use case scenario, we have a client that has all of their third parties in, and they have thousands of them, and they have very specific contract terms about something specific with each vendor. That says, for example, you must remediate all critical vulnerabilities within 30 days. Well, they're using us to track their performance of those vendors. And let's say one vendor has a 30-day requirement, another vendor has a 60-day requirement, or whatever. They pull our data out and see what is their actual patching cadence. And then they tie that in with their contract management system to see what the terms are. And it spits out a report that says, are my vendors in compliance with their individual contract needs? This is something they could not do before. And again, all of this is done in a continuous process. None of this is point in time. If you want to look at your vendors, your third-party risk management, you can keep track of all of your vendors in exactly the same way we're keeping track of you. So all the same data points are presented. You can see all of your vendors' vulnerabilities. You can see everything they've ever fixed and how long it took them to fix it. You can see all of their open ports, all of their web application findings. You can see their email security, their patching cadence, their breach history, which is especially important if you're vetting new vendors. You can see what kind of dark web credentials they may be exposing, including any of your credentials. And then you can also issue questionnaires to them. You can issue any number of questionnaires to any vendor at any time. They can all be active simultaneously. You can set automatic questionnaire frequencies. So if you have a vendor that needs to be a questionnaire that's done every year, you set it as annual, and then you can forget about it, because when their existing one expires, they're automatically prompted to fill out a new one. You don't have to do anything. And it's also important to note, and I didn't really mention this up front, the types of scans and analysis that we are doing are by their very nature non-intrusive and non-disruptive, okay? We're very thorough about the data that we gather, but there are certain red lines that we will not, do not, and cannot cross. And the only red line is we do not exploit what we find. That's where we stop. And that's really the only thing that separates us from a pen test. So you can consider this, our platform, our service, to be very similar to something like a continuous pen test, with the only difference being when we find a vulnerability, we're just going to report on it. We're not going to attempt to exploit it. That's really the only difference. And I think y'all can actually, speak to that about how we have been so thorough. And as he mentioned, finding things that nobody else found.
Oh, by the way, one of the things that we endorse in our TPRM program is collaboration.
Yeah.
What does this mean? So it means when you send a questionnaire to one of your critical vendors that you need to monitor continuously, you allow them for free, no additional costs, any costs whatsoever on his side. You allow him to get access to the data that you have found, and they can also indicate which one of the assets are more critical than the others, so that you can have a more accurate risk scenario on that specific vendor. And this is stretching means of collaboration. We know that I would say more than 80% of our supply chain are small to micro companies out there, and this is a reality that we share around the world. And it's highly likely they will not possess the same tools or as sophisticated tools, or perhaps as sophisticated processes to take a look at the risk. So we might as well grant them with a tool that it can explain them the importance of what you need to take a look at them, how your business is connected and can and should be connected with them, and what type of best practices need to be endorsed, vice versa, right? And this will help.
And I can say this too. I didn't even highlight this earlier, but it's an important point. I showed you the task management feature earlier. That's not limited to just your organization. You can assign tasks to your vendors.
Exactly.
Okay. And it puts you in a proactive stance with your vendors, the ability to say, hey, I've discovered a high risk problem with my vendor. Instead of reaching out to them via email or whatever like that, you can build a task for them here. They will get the same email that they would if they were one of your employees. And you can track the task and have conversations with them, just like I showed before. And again, it all stays in the platform. So from an auditing perspective, you'll know that you've assigned them a task. You'll know what was said back and forth about it. You'll know who is working on it and when, and you'll know what was done, and you'll know when it's finished and that it was done correctly. The amount of insight this gives you into that process is something that you just have not had before. What you've had to do before is you've had to depend upon the vendor and take their word for it. And as David pointed out, many vendors on the small side of things, they either lack the tools or they lack the expertise, or both, in order to do this kind of diagnosis on themselves. They may be unaware of the risks that they have, and this gives them the ability to see what you see. And I'll show you a perfect example here, okay? The company here, our company is, and this is us, our company is Cyberdyne Systems. And we have a third party called Wayland Yutani Corporation, all right? Well, if you give Wayland Yutani Corporation an invite and they log in and they see their own dashboard with their own findings. They don't see your findings, they only see their findings, okay? But now they have access to all of this very useful information about themselves, and there's no cost to them. Why wouldn't they use them?
But
And the thinking is,
yes, and
if they improve their cybersecurity, it improves your cybersecurity.
Eric, also, I think it's important if there are any companies here present in this webinar today that have branch offices overseas or scattered throughout the world, the same applies to your branch offices. They can have access to their own portal with a portion of assets that belong to them, all right? And then you can have the group level view, and they can't see the group level, but the group level can see the branch offices. And therefore, you are able to benchmark themselves against each other, trying to understand if there are common needs that can be addressed or if there are specific needs to be addressed. I would like also, Eric, if you could browse along with the ALE reporting, and specifically, how can we, and this is interesting to show, is how can we calculate, or can we help you calculate the potential financial impact of each one of the cyber risks seen in this platform to help you to teach, I wouldn't say to teach you, but to help you how to allocate the correct resources and how to prioritize the resources to address the issues. Can you please show that as well, please, Eric?
Absolutely. Well, first, we allow you to calculate and or define the value of an individual asset. And of course, we're working in a cloud world today, so that's not just the physical cost of the asset, because there may be no physical asset. So it could be the cost is associated with the value of the data, or the potential cost you would incur in lost sales and income, or regulatory fines, or whatever it is, okay? You can have a cost associated with that. We then tally up the threats that are facing this particular asset, and then you can adjust exposure factors and annualized rate of occurrences. You can detail what countermeasures you have in place that could defend this asset, and what the countermeasure effectiveness is, and what that countermeasure cost is. And then from there, we can calculate your ROSI, your return on security investment. And to spell that out in real numbers, look at it this way. Let's assume that you subscribe to an appliance or a service that costs you, let's say, $5,000 US every year to maintain, but it's defending you against $50,000 worth of risk. Well, that's a good spend. You can take that to your CFO and defend it. On the other hand, let's assume that that service costs $50,000, but it's only defending you against $5,000 worth of risk. Well, in reality, that's a bad spend. You'd be better off actually taking the hit because you're not spending your money effectively. Now, that's good for things that are already in place, but it's even better for budgetary planning, because let's assume that you know that if I may wish to subscribe to a service that costs $5,000 a year, and it would defend me against $50,000 worth of risk. You can calculate that here and have it create your return on security investment. There's your purchase justification right there. You sit that in front of the CFO and say, this is a good way to spend our money. And the numbers speak for themselves. Y'all, what do you think about this so far? How has this helped you in your daily duties?
Well, we actually used this feature of sharing with other vendors of, third-party vendors. I won't again disclose the name, but we were dealing with third-party payroll vendor abroad. not an Israeli vendor, and they're quite a known vendor. And however, their cybersecurity score was very low. I mean, so if you're showing now 700 out of 900 on the demo, so their score was about 350, which was extremely low for us. And they're a web-based app, so it was quite a concern for us. We shared with them, of course, both reports, detailed reports, executive reports, and we also, of course, added them to the TPRM, the third-party vendor system. At the beginning, they said, no, we don't believe in those types of systems. They're scoring systems only. They don't give you very much benefit. And then the CISO told them, okay, we don't have to work together. There are other vendors, and it's up to you. Eventually, when you have a strong CISO and a strong company behind you, so they understood the subtle hint, and they started working on the findings. I believe there's still more work for them. They're a large company, but they're working on it, and they fixed several stuff. And we, continued working with them as well. So it was a mutual benefit on all sides. So
well, and I'd like to add something to what he else said, because I can speak about the how a similar process has happened with many of our other clients. You'll find,
guys, we have a question then, just for sake of time. We have a question here from Mr. May Green. So does all OWASP top 10 be covered in your vulnerability scanning engine?
That plus a whole
Sorry
lot
to interrupt
more.
you guys.
No, that plus a whole lot more. But yes, we do cover the OWASP top 10. In fact, you can see that. Let me get to the proper place here. It's even a category in our filters. Let me see, maybe it's over here. Hold on. There we go, right there. So yes, and that changes as the OWASP top 10 changes. So hopefully that answered the question. But you will find this to be very common with vendors, because they're used to first generation security ratings tools that, I mean, let's be honest, they just don't produce very reliable information. And so they're used to being able to say, oh, well, yeah, we don't trust these security ratings tools. We're not going to act on that because they're usually just generating tons of false positives and blah, blah, blah. They have not had experience with people like us, because if you make them look at the data and the evidence, because the evidence is important, because you can literally say, if they want to say this is a false positive, this is not a thing, the evidence is there. We'll show you why we triggered the finding. And that's very difficult for a vendor to argue with.
I can share another interesting insight. We just onboarded, in fact, you were on that call yesterday, a large service provider in South America. So they are representing more than 10 countries throughout South America. And one of their main concerns were last year, they were using such a tool, so a security ratings tool. And I'm not going to mention the name, it's not relevant, but they changed to us. And one of the reasons was that they had the feeling that that specific tool was bringing them a false sense of security, meaning that they even had a quite good score in that platform. The problem was that they had also, at the time when they were breached, and throughout a week or 2 weeks in a row, the score didn't change, although they were breached. And that pulled all the alarms internally, saying, how can this be? We were breached. There were highly big deficiencies detected, how come this hasn't changed? So this triggered the false sense of security that passive collection tools can bring to you. It's a huge liability, if you ask me, in my personal opinion. So this is one of the problems that we have sorted out to them. And I can tell you our score comparatively is quite lower than it was on the other one, but at least they have a true sense of their cyber risk at this point, which they didn't have so far. Sorry, just sharing this experience. To the other attendees, so if there are any questions, please throw us hard questions. We'd like to answer all of those hard questions, technical hard questions. We're glad to answer all of them.
מאי, אם יש לך עוד שאלה, או למישהו יש עוד שאלות, מוזמנים לרשום ב-Q&A, או להרים יד ואני אתן לכם לדבר. Up to you. Okay.
Meanwhile, if there's no questions so far, I can tell that this is a SaaS-based platform. It runs on yearly subscriptions. I can say that it is the price is highly competitive in comparison with the previous tools that we have mentioned. So there is no reason to have a false sense of security.
Mai has another question. What does the implementation of Fortify's solution involve? Agent servers, or are all scans performed at the perimeter?
A good question. Good question.
Perfect question.
Please, Eric.
Going right ahead. All right. You know, as David mentioned at the beginning, the platform is modular. So we sell different pieces of it depending upon what you need. The default piece is the enterprise module, and that would be an external risk assessment of your company. For that, you don't need to install or set up anything. I mean, after all, the bad guys are able to figure out all this stuff, and they don't have to install anything to do it. We're doing the same kind of thing. So yes, there is no setup involved whatsoever for the external risk assessment. Same thing goes for third parties. The only thing you need to do is tell us who you want to look at, and that's it. The third part, you do not require consent from the third parties. That's a rather important point, okay? Because we are not crossing any of those legal red lines about we don't do exploits and things of that nature, and because our assessments are non-intrusive and non-disruptive, you don't have to tell a vendor, hey, we're going to scan you, or you don't have to ask them, hey, can we scan you? Because let's be honest, getting that is rather difficult or impossible sometimes. We don't care who they are. We don't care where they are. We don't even care if they try to stop us from scanning them, because the methods that we use actually are designed to avoid detection in the first place. And even if a vendor attempts to block a scan, all of our traffic is running through an anonymizer. So they don't even know it's us that's scanning them, even if they can detect it, and most do not. All right. It gives you the ability to see them and everything about them, whether they want you to or not. And it's a completely unvarnished look at them, all of their dirty laundry. Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought there for a second there. But yeah, oh yeah, I know what it is. Going back to what the installs and setups. If you want to get internal data, and that's not something that we have really discussed heavily up to this point. Okay, we focused a lot on the external risk assessment, but we can do internal as well on you. Now for that, there is install and setup required, because we have to have a sensor of some kind on the inside of your organization. We're not going to hack your firewall and try to figure that out. All right. But we're not very specific about what that sensor needs to be. We're very flexible. So for example, if you already have something in place, let's say you have Tenable agents, Rapid7, Qualys, CrowdStrike, Tanium, any of the above, okay? We integrate with all of those top tier platforms and can use them as a data source. So if you've already got something, you don't necessarily need to throw it away. We can pull it in. Or let's say you've got a centralized scanner. Let's say you've got a Nessus Pro that you've already set up and it's scanning you. Fine, we can pull data from that. I'll say it like this. The only requirements that we have for an internal data source is that it needs to produce reliable findings and it needs to be accessible. In other words, we need to be able to get to that data. And that can take a variety of forms. Some platforms will upload their data to a cloud, and then we can pull the data from the cloud. Some platforms, they have like an on-prem Nessus Pro. They have an API. We can set up a way to access that API, usually via site-to-site VPN, and then we can pull that data from your Nessus Pro. But if all else fails, we have a variety of manual methods for getting that data. You can export that data and push it to us, or put it somewhere like an S3 bucket, and we can pull it from you. We're very, very flexible, and we've had to be, because lots of different clients have lots of different security requirements that will, in some cases, enable or limit how we can get at that data. But again, as long as the data is reliable and accessible, we can pull it in.
Great. How much of your scans are being blocked by WAF solutions?
Good question. And it's a two-part question. If we are doing what we call a direct scan, and our any paying client to us, we normally do a direct scan. What that means is our scans will be originating from the same IPs every time. We typically work with you during onboarding to whitelist those IPs so they don't set off anything in your IDS IPS, so you can identify the traffic and know that it's us that's doing it and not someone else, etc. Now, if we are scanning, let's say, a third party who doesn't know who we are, and and we're not going to tell them. Well, what happens is we run our traffic through an anonymizing service. So our traffic comes from tens of thousands of different IPs that are also constantly changing, all right? So let's assume someone attempts to block us with a WAF. Well, we will detect that we're being blocked on that IP and switch to another IP. They can't block them all. They will try. Some have tried. It doesn't matter. We will eventually get all of the information on them. Unless they want to block the entire internet, which obviously they can't do, we will get their information. And because the bad guys are doing it this way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Maya, if you want to join the discussion and add you, just let us know.
Well, and I want to add another point to kind of finish off that last question. Is this, okay? If a bad guy can find it, we can find it. If a bad guy can get around it, we can get around it too, because we're using the same techniques that they do. It's that simple.
Let me just add also something which I think it's relevant. We not only enable to import data taken from other tools you have in your ecosystem. This platform itself is provided with an API where you can export the data that we collect to other. For example, we have customers connecting our platform to the SIM systems, for example, and other to ticketing systems and so forth. So all of these possibilities, either importing or exporting data from and to the platform, is perfectly viable, and it is available in our platform here as well.
And I'll also point something else out as well, and that is everything that I've shown you here today. It's all software that has been developed in-house and maintained in-house by FortifyData. We do not outsource this to anyone else. We have our own in-house development team. We have our own in-house support and customer success team. You get unlimited support with the platform. In fact, y'all, I can say it, but it actually always sounds better coming from an actual client. How has support been for you?
It's great. I mean, we've been working with the tool, I believe, for 2 years now, or maybe more. And we still have, we started with weekly meetings, or maybe bi-weekly, I mean, twice a week. And then weekly, and then we moved to monthly meetings. But we're still having them, and we just raise any questions that we have with the support representative, customer success, of course. Now it's Kate. I mean, there were others as well, but and some of the sessions we asked that you will join, Eric, and of course we have the email support and you know, everything we need is just answered in sometimes a few minutes. Sometimes if it's like more elaborate, it takes a few hours, but usually it's quite prompt. Yeah, I had something on my mind. I on the system, just wanted to mention on the when we had an assessment on one of our websites, then we asked a vendor to take care of the website, and they said, okay, we took care of it. We rescanned, and the issue still occurred. I asked Eric, I asked you, so they say they took care of it. So what's going on? Why isn't your tool saying it's fixed? And Eric said it's not only our tool. So he checked it on other tools as well, and they didn't fix it. They just said it's fixed. So it was, let's say, it was a misunderstanding.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and what would you say about growth of the platform over time? Have you seen new features, new functionality, and things that have been very beneficial, and how responsive we have been to your request? Say, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have X? And
yeah,
how
well,
that actually translates into new features over time.
well, you've been responsive, of course, for I think everything that we asked for. Also, the rescan wasn't our request, but there is a request board that anyone can suggest. Like I forgot the name, but anyone can suggest an addition to FortifyData, and then you of course consider it and work on it. So the rescan is one thing that was asked for, and after development it was added. And so again, we were very grateful for it on the company side, and otherwise, of course, I mean, the features are endless. So in my Hebrew speech at the beginning, so I said that it's the platform is like a Swiss Army knife. So it has lots and lots of features. Sometimes some of the features I discovered during my work with it, because there are so many features under the hood that I wasn't aware of, and then you pointed out, so here you can do this and that, even though we had like you know, several demos and several how do you call it, sessions with customer success. So it's been very I mean, it's a very good tool, very insightful, and features have been added, as you said, along the road, which makes it a really good solution.
And basically, one of the things that, first of all, for sake of time, I think we need to wrap up at this point. We could be the rest of the evening here talking about the feature, and we haven't covered entirely the whole thing. But let me just emphasize the following. First and utmost, this platform, better than us telling about it, it speaks for itself. Therefore, we have put in the chat the challenge. So whoever wants to take a look at their own reports, to compare with their own tools or whatever they want to do, to take a look at their external facing assets reports, please reach out to Mr. Ayal. He has shared the email address. We will gladly produce the sample reports and share the sample report with you guys. And also, at any given point in time, always available for a one-to-one call where you can ask all the questions and we can try to identify how we can help your current problems and current needs. We have all sorts of different customers, from the small customer to the big customer, from across different industries and geographies. So we will highly probably will have a similar case that we can share some thoughts, some ideas, and some suggestions on how you can solve, or how can this platform solve your problems. So please feel free to reach out. It's free of cost, of course. It's a gratitude that we will provide. And for the next webinar, and there will be more webinars such as this one, we will touch a bit further the compliance portion of things. So should you need to comply with ISO 27001 or NIST 2.0, the challenge will be, we can send you one of our questionnaires for you to fill out, and then we will tell you how compliant you might be of one of those two frameworks, and we can discuss that internally with you. Okay, so feel free to do that at any given point in time. We will always glad to help you guys. Thank you very much.
I'll just repeat the email address. So it's info,
Yes, please.
info @zds.co.il. And of course, most of you have my number as well. And if needed, I'm here. You can contact me, and we'll be happy to see you. Guys, I want to thank you, David, Eric. Thank you for everything.
Thank you very much.
It was again very insightful. I think I'm speaking on behalf of everyone. As I said, there's also a survey after, so if you can take 1 minute or two just to answer it, it would be very helpful for us for the future as well. So
thank you. Looking forward for the next one.
Same here.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.